Hi, my name is Alison Rodriguez, and today I will be discussing with you the topic that I chose to research, which was slavery in the 19th century. Slavery ended with the Civil War, but the struggle to end it consumed mostly of the first half of the 19th century. Slavery began in 1619 when the first African Americans were brought to the United States by the Dutch, and this led all the way up until the 1800s. The slave trade had ended in 1807, and this was the distribution of the slaves to the northern and the southern states. And in the first half of the 19th century, there was much tension between the North and the South. And in the North and some of the South, there was an abolition movement to ending slavery from growing. Frederick Douglass, who was once a slave, would write about his experiences, and then he became an anti-slavery advocate. In the North, Harriet Tubman, who was also an anti-slavery advocate, was trying to get people out of slavery, and she did this by influencing the Underground Railroad. In the South, there was resistance present from the slaves, and this was them refusing to do labor, and this also led to violence. And in 1831, a slave that went by the name of Nat Turner led a rebellion. This rebellion turned out to be one of the biggest and most bloodiest rebellions in United States history, which led to the killing of 55 white people. And 30 years later, in 1860, a white preacher led a mixed race rebellion, which took place at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. And he killed many people but was captured and executed. Events like these, which were very deadly, brought much fear to the slave owners because they were scared of a full-scale war or revolution. And this influenced racism and anti-slavery laws such as the Fugitive Slave Act, which required northern states where slavery was illegal to return all of the runaway slaves to the South. This made the Underground Railroad much harder because now the smugglers would have to transport the runaway slaves to Canada to ensure their freedom. And in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. He tolerated slavery, but he did not like it at all. And when he got elected, South Carolina and many other states seceded from the United States, and they created their own country, which was known as the Confederacy. Abraham Lincoln declared war on them, and which was also known as the Civil War. This war began in 1861, and in the beginning, the North was expected to win because of the advantages of population and the use of resources were very vast in the North. And in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was written by Abraham Lincoln. This speech declared that the slaves were free and they had the right to join the North. This war was by far one of the worst wars in the United States, and it was led to the killing of 750,000 Americans, which was more than all the United States wars they were involved in put together. The Civil War ended with the victory of the North in 1865. They surrendered at Appomattox, Virginia, and 6 days later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater. The era after the Civil War, which was between 1863 and 1877, which was about 12 years, is also known as the Reconstruction era, and at the time it was a place for healing between the two regions, or the North and the South. It was the healing of the citizens. The South was being occupied by the North now, who were forced to follow the laws that the North were giving them, and it was the use of the transition to freedom of the slaves. Introduced the three new amendments was the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. The 13th was that slavery was illegal. The 14th was that the citizens of the slavery are now known as citizens. And the 15th was that slaves have the right to vote. And when the Radical Reconstruction era had ended, the Jim Crow era began, and the slaves had lost all hope during this era because they had began the segregation era. And in 1865, the passage of the Voting Rights Act was passed. This era was a time where the black citizens were free, but they didn't have the rights like the other citizens. They were treated brutally and had a lot of racial issues. This is the repetition of history which was seen during slavery. This era also allowed white businesses to make the black people kind of like enslaves people, and this was used to them paying off debt, so they would have to work to pay off their debt, which was also like slavery because they weren't getting paid. And laws in the South, known as the Black Codes, were designed to convict black men mostly for breaking minor laws, and these men would be sent to hard laboring jobs. Despite the fact that slavery ended in 1865, the federal government of the United States didn't protect the rights of the black people in the South under the Constitution. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 tried to give the federal government the authority to intervene in cases where Southern laws were violating rights, but was never really enforced, and in 1883 it was repealed. In 1896, a Supreme Court case called Plessy versus Ferguson, where a black man named Homer Plessy was trying to sit in a segregated whites-only section of a train, and he got arrested. He appealed this, and the Supreme Court said that it was not unjust and that it was right because he was still free and he wasn't being treated wrong, which it violated the 14th Amendment. The whole journey of slavery led to many unfortunate events which influenced racism. Racism is something we still see today in the 21st century and something that is going to take a toll on the world around us forever.